السلام عليكم.
Hey, welcome, Sam. How are you?
الحمد لله.
Sarah, I'm going to send you the schedule. I
Sure.
can introduce you a little bit later.
Sounds good.
Okay, it's 3:05, so I think we can officially start us off. Bismillah. Salams and welcome everyone to our topic of the evening, International Law in Palestine, the role of the ICJ and the ICC. My name is Zainab Zahid, and I'm the Advocacy and Policy Fellow at the Muslim Civic Coalition. Briefly introducing the coalition, we'd like to make it known that our mission is to be an institution that educates and amplifies social causes that affect our community and partner communities. This means that our focus is on creating equitability for all via our laws, our public officials, and the sharing of our stories. Our facilitator for tonight's session is Kinza Khan, the Advocacy and Policy Consultant for the Coalition, who will guide us into a rich conversation regarding how our international legal establishments can be utilized as tools for justice in disconcerting times, with our special guest from American Muslims for Palestine and Tarek Khalil. Kinza will introduce him and the breakdown of the topic shortly. Thank you so much.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Kinza Khan. As Zainab said, thank you for the introduction. I'm an Advocacy and Policy Fellow, consultant at Muslim Civic Coalition, and I'm the Vice President of Muslim Bar Association of Chicago. And I'm going to introduce, or let Sarah introduce herself. Sarah is the President of the Muslim Bar Association of Chicago.
Thank you, Kinza. As Kinza said, my name is Sarah Suleiman. I'm honored to welcome you to this event as the president of the Muslim Bar Association of Chicago, also known as the MBA Chicago. We are actually the oldest regional bar association in the country. We were founded in 1997. We've had some highs and lows, and right now I'd say we're on a high. We've got lots of energy. I'm really excited for all of our programming that we've done in the last few years and that we've got coming up. Our membership includes lawyers, law students, judges, professors, all sorts of people in the legal field, and all dedicated to fostering the highest level of ethics and, important to this event, and we're all committed to advancing justice. MBA Chicago offers a variety of different initiatives in terms of professional networking, educational opportunities, and community building events. A few of the highlights from this past year are Lawyers in the Classroom, which is one initiative that we started that has been very successful. Essentially, you sign up to teach civics courses to various levels of students at Al-Aqsa and at Universal School in Bridgeview. That has been very important in, educating the younger generation of people who are thinking about entering the legal profession. Another highlight would be the small group networking lunches that we've developed, which are geared towards big law and in-house attorneys developing relationships with each other. The whole idea here is that we're trying to cater lots of different types of attorneys. Also last but not least, very important are these Know Your Rights seminars that Kinza has been taking the lead on, where we've been partnering with not only Muslim Civic Coalition, but also CARE and a few other different organizations coming up. So stay tuned. I'd also like to brief you on one upcoming event happening on Saturday, August 9th. We will be teaming up with the Muppies. If you've never heard of the Muppies, these are the Muslim urban professionals, and this is specifically the Chicago chapter. We're hosting a casual meetup in Lincoln Park at the zoo, where you're welcome to bring your families. This is a very casual, laid-back environment. The whole goal being to foster, community and connect with each other, and enjoy a day out at the park. So please register. I'll share a link for the Zoom registration on the chat, and let us know if you have any questions. Turning to tonight's event, this event is very important. It reflects our commitment to a thoughtful dialogue on this topic, on human rights, on legal accountability, and MBA Chicago is proud to be a part of such an important conversation, especially in light of all that has been going on over the last couple of years. So with that, I'll turn it to whoever's talking next. Is it Zainab or Lena?
I'll be introducing Tarek.
Okay, gotcha.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you so much. Yes, so if you are a lawyer, or if you're in Chicago, or if you're an urban professional in Chicago, please do come to that August 9th event. I'll be there, Sarah will be there. We're really excited. It'll be an outdoor event, so we're gonna get to enjoy some of that Chicago weather. So we are really excited about that. And so that being said, thank you so much everyone for coming. This is such a timely topic. I'm really excited to actually partner with Tarek Khalil on this topic. It is so timely. It is so perfect for right now. And so it's really important that we kind of, talk over here about this. Tarek, I'm going to pin you. I'm going to spotlight you actually for everybody, if that's okay. And I'll pin myself as well, which I think I'm going to try to do both. Okay, there we are. So it's both of us pinned now for everybody. And so basically, today I'm going to introduce Tarek, and then we're going to have a session. We're going to make it more Q&A. We're going to link some information for you all in the chat. We're going to basically make it a conversation. It's a little bit easier sometimes than kind of going through a bunch of slides for everybody. So with that in mind. So Tarek Khalil is the education coordinator for the American Muslims for Palestine, which is AMP for the Chicago chapter. He is an attorney, he's a lecturer and an activist. He worked with the Illinois Coalition Against Torture, ICAT, which is an organization which seeks to end domestic police torture and to raise awareness of global torture. Tarek was also a volunteer attorney with the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE Chicago, which is where he and I met back like 10 years ago or something. The nation and CARE Chicago is the nation's largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy group. Tarek lectures on topics such as modern Palestinian history, Middle East politics, and Palestinian rights under international law. If anyone wants to learn more about AMP, there is a link to the organization in the chat, which is American Muslims for Palestine. Thanks, Tarek, for being here.
Thank you for having me. Such a pleasure. And I think it was 13 years ago, but
So wow, I'm just
who's counting?
Time is flying. Time is flying when you're having fun.
COVID was 5 years ago. I mean,
that's true. Actually, I feel like COVID was last year, so that's where we're at. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and start asking some questions about. There's so much here to unpack. So first, can you please briefly explain the difference between the ICJ, so the International Court of Justice, and the ICC, which is the International Criminal Court, and how each one applies to the situation in Palestine?
Thank you for having me. This is, I love these types of audiences. I rarely get to talk about, the ins and outs of these two international courts, but it's very important that we understand their purpose and why they were created, because there's a lot of misuse. I hear people, talk about the ICJ when they actually mean the ICC. ICJ warrants, that doesn't exist. It's ICC. So I'll make it brief, and then we'll get into some very important detail. So the ICJ, which is the International Court of Justice, is actually an organ of the United Nations. It's part and parcel of the UN. So when the UN was created, the ICJ was the court, the most highly esteemed and the highest court in the world, and it is within the United Nations makeup. And it resolves disputes between states. So it's not a criminal court. It resolves disputes between states. And that's been around since 1945, since the creation of the United Nations. The ICC is a much more recent institution. It was founded in 2002 with the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, and it declared itself to be in a global fight to basically end impunity. And it was established to be the world's first permanent international criminal court. So if you remember, there were two main ad hoc criminal tribunals, namely the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, which is ICTY, and the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. These two existed because there was no ICC. So they carried on their role, and the purposes of these ad hoc tribunals was to prosecute individuals. So that's the key difference between the two. The ICJ resolves disputes between states. The ICC, you have an actual prosecutor, just like in a domestic court setting here, where you have a prosecutor that issues warrants, and then there's arrests in line with those warrants, and then there's prosecution for crimes. As of right now, there are 125 countries that are party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Palestine is one of them. That can get a little tricky, because if you listen to Zionist propaganda and you listen to Western media, they will tell you that, well, Palestine is not a state. How could it be a member of the ICC? Well, you know how law is. Sometimes a thing exists for that purpose, but not necessarily for another purpose. So for jurisdictional purposes, Palestine is a state. It's the state of Palestine for jurisdictional purposes. The ICC will prosecute individuals, but their jurisdiction is limited to 4 crimes. War crimes, and examples of those would be like torture, destruction and appropriation of property, settlement expansion in the West Bank, for example, and crimes against humanity, murder, forcible transfer, or forcible displacement. Another popular term that kind of means the same thing is ethnic cleansing, torture, persecution. Apartheid is a crime against humanity. The crime of aggression, and also what the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda called the crime of crimes, the crime of genocide. That's a separate crime in itself. So the ICC can prosecute individuals, and their jurisdiction is limited to war crimes, crimes against humanity, crime of aggression, and the crime of genocide. So that's why it's relevant in relation to Palestine. What is going on in the ICJ right now, which could take years, is first, now there's a request for provisional measures that Israel still doesn't follow. Now there will be an adjudication on the merits of whether Israel is in fact committing the crime of genocide. The ICC, what exists right now are warrants for former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and current Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for war crimes and crimes against humanity. There's a specific crime that was not included, but that was a hot topic at the time of the issuance of those warrants, the crime of genocide. So, and I hear a lot of people say that Benjamin Netanyahu was wanted for genocide by the ICC. I wish that were the case, but that's not the case. And the main reason for that is because it's the ICC prosecutor, I think, is playing politics as well. And, you know, that's something that we can get into later, but that's the basic distinction between those two courts.
Thank you. I have a follow-up on that. Can the ICC issue a warrant, an arrest warrant, for someone who is, you know, charged with one of these crimes?
They are charged, Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav.
So in that case, could the ICC issue an arrest warrant?
The ICC already did, November of 2024. So that's why if you look at the mayoral election in New York, when Zohran Mamdani was asked about Benjamin Netanyahu coming to New York, he said, I would arrest him.
Yeah.
And that's true. He can, as the highest executive official within that city, he would be abiding by international law. And that's exactly what international law requires. And he can extradite them to The Hague. And by the way, both of these courts sit in The Hague. So they share the same building. They just serve different purposes altogether. And that's why, remember, Benjamin Netanyahu was sitting with Trump and all of his cronies at that big table, and he was saying, what would happen if Mamdani as mayor tried to arrest you? Then Trump jokingly said, I would just get him out. You know, feel like, you know, this court is not more powerful than me, even though it's the international court. It's the international criminal court. The whole thing seems laughable because of the perception that people have, and to some extent I can see why, that the courts are just symbolic gestures. They're not really going to lead to anything substantial. But I'm here to say it will take time. But the fact that you can now log in to the ICC website and see the name Benjamin Netanyahu on there, to me, that's a step in the right direction. Sorry to criticize that.
I do have more questions coming up for you about enforcement and all of that, because that is a common thing that we hear, obviously. Before that, let's backtrack a little bit. So obviously Gaza is in our hearts and our minds right now. It's in the news right now. The word genocide has gained international traction. The word genocide is being used. First, what is the International Criminal Court's definition of genocide, the legal definition under the ICC? What is their definition of genocide, and how does it apply here in Palestine? It seems like an obvious question, but I want to know the legal terminology.
No, it's actually a very important one. If you watch, and just like I've watched for the past almost 2 years, a lot of pundits and commentators and, you know, experts talk about genocide, and I'm listening, and I am willing to bet that those that are talking about it, at least, you know, okay, there are some, like on Democracy Now! And a few other shows, real experts are talking about it, and I learn a lot from them. But I'm talking about our mainstream press. I'm willing to bet they've never read the Genocide Convention. I'm just so confident in saying that, because of the words that they're using. They have this lay understanding of it. They don't know the legal contours. They don't know how it applies. I guarantee you they haven't even read the opinions of the ad hoc criminal tribunals on the topic. or the opinions by the ICJ regarding the Bosnian genocide or the Serbia versus Croatia case. There's a lot of case. There's some case law on this that really, flesh out how genocide applies and the full interpretation of the enumerated provisions of the Genocide Convention. So the ICC, the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, defines genocide the same way that the Genocide Convention does. But I did want to note the actual coinage of the term. It was coined by Raphael Lemkin, who was a Jewish person, and during the Holocaust, he conceptualized the term as a continuum of violence as opposed to just mass killing. And that's the perception that a lot of people had, is that to qualify as genocide, there must be just hundreds and thousands of people on the ground with limbs torn off. If I don't have that imagery, it cannot be genocide. That's the furthest thing from the truth. Lemkin used the word, actually, he used the word in his writings, crippling instead of the word extermination when defining genocide. So to cripple permanently a human group. As it relates to Israel, genocide means having the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. And us lawyers, we know the difference between actus reus and mens rea. The Genocide Convention is very specific here and says that you can have this intent to destroy a group in whole or in part by killing members of the group, causing serious bodily injury or mental harm to that group, imposing measures intended to prevent births within that group, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction of members of that group in whole or in part. That last part is very crucial. The first ICC prosecutor, Luis Moreno Ocampo, I believe the last name is Ocampo, he described the siege of Gaza as genocide. So since 2007, Israel's been committing genocide, basically, is what he's saying. Because the siege and blockade is a calculated measure to bring about. See, it's not saying it will actually result in the physical destruction of the group. So long as it is calculated to bring about the physical destruction of that group, it constitutes the crime of genocide. And that is something that just goes over the heads of many media pundits. So this has been described as a slow death. It's measures inflicted to create slow death. The ICJ has favored an interpretation in the sense that the measure inflicted must entail some probability with regard to full or partial destruction of that group. So, for example, in the Bosnia judgment, the ICJ defined ethnic cleansing, the act of ethnic cleansing, as rendering an area ethnically homogeneous by using force or intimidation to remove persons from that given area. And it was the view that at least some aspects of this forcible transfer or forcible expulsion should be included as an element in the context of the genocidal act. Where it gets a little tricky is the intent element. There are two levels of intent that are involved in the crime of genocide. It's called the crime of crimes for a reason. It's so heinous, so destructive that it shocks the conscience. It's not just extermination. It's not just mass killing. There's an intent to destroy a people in whole or in part. And that is why third states throughout the world, not just those that are party to the convention, genocide is prohibited under international law by way of treaty, those that sign the Genocide Convention, but also by way of custom. It's part of customary international law. So even if you're not a signatory to the Genocide Convention, you are obligated to not contribute toward it and to make sure that you prevent and don't aid and abet the crime of genocide, i.e. be complicit in. We talked about the U.S. being complicit in genocide. And let me invoke some Latin terms here. Lawyers love Latin terms. It's basically a jus cogens norm creating obligations erga omnes. What that means is that it's a peremptory norm. It's a norm that's accepted and recognized by the international community, and no derogation is permitted. So you cannot argue self-defense while committing genocide, even if genocide was committed against you. And Israel loves to invoke October 7th as genocide. Okay, even if it's genocide, you can't respond with genocide. That's not a defense to genocide. And international law is clear on that point. And by the way, the same thing applies to apartheid. So you need the intent to commit one of those acts, to kill, cause injury, inflict conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction of that group. That's one element of the mens rea. The other one is what's called the dolus specialis, and that means special intent, to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. And the South African application to the ICJ, 84 pages, about 500 something footnotes, documenting through rhetoric, through the sheer force that was used. And one thing to keep in mind, 6,000 tons of bombs were dropped on Gaza in the first 2 months of the genocidal campaign. And they say that was more that was dropped in Germany during World War II. So just to give you some context, 365 kilometers of land. So the South Africa basically argued, even if there wasn't the genocidal rhetoric from Bezalel Smotrich, from Itamar and Ben-Gvir, from Benjamin Netanyahu, from Yoav Gallant, from whoever, even if that didn't exist, the sheer force that was used on civilian infrastructure, there's no other way to argue but that you intend to destroy a people in whole or in part. And I'll leave it there. Sorry, I took too long on that.
No, thank you. And thank you also for mentioning Bosnia, because it was the 30th, this July
Yes,
11th, 2
yes.
weeks ago, it was the 30th anniversary of the Bosnian genocide. So thank you for mentioning that too.
Yeah.
So my next question is, what are the current cases and legal proceedings involving Palestine at either the ICJ or the ICC that you believe the public should be paying more attention to?
Okay. Right now, so far there have been provisional measures issued by the ICJ for Israel to basically prevent genocide, to preserve evidence and to allow for humanitarian aid. Well, it's destroying evidence and it's not allowing media to enter Gaza, so it's in violation of that. It's not preventing genocide. It's in its ongoing genocidal campaign. And so it's basically not followed the basic provisional measures that were issued by the ICJ in 2024. And by the way, there were multiple provisional measures, I believe in January, March, and May. And remember when, for about a 2 to 3 week period, we were saying all eyes on Rafah because Israel was about to initiate a military campaign in Rafah when most of the people in Gaza were moving south. So you had about half the population almost in Rafah, in the Rafah area. So the ICJ playing politics. And look, international law, I quote it, I use it, I try to further the cause for Palestine while invoking it. I believe the ICJ played too much politics here because it did not call for the suspension of military operations, full stop. It just said Israel must halt its operations in Rafah. Okay, so Khan Yunis is fine, Deir al-Balah is fine, Gaza North is fine, where 700,000 Palestinians are. It just, you could have gone further. You didn't. And the American judge, and this is what's really despicable here. The American judge, once she retired, she basically said that the ICJ did not say that what Israel is doing in Gaza is provisionally genocidal. And that's really despicable because the ruling, she is right that the provisional measure did not say that what Israel is doing is provisionally genocidal. Those words were not used in that frame. But if you are ordering that Israel do whatever it can to prevent the crime of genocide, you're by definition saying that there's some reason to believe, a low threshold. It's like an indictment. Okay, there's at least some evidence to suggest that this could be that. So stop. There's no way you can make that argument, but she did, and that's just utterly despicable. But notice she never made that argument in her opinion. She didn't make that as a judge. Now she's retired, she's in front of media, and she was making those, and she started making those statements. But either way, I want to get back to the South African application. The South African application highlighted some of the indignities and crimes that Palestinians endured. So, and remember, South Africa, the application is in line with Raphael Lemkin's conceptualization of genocide as part of a continuum. So South Africa was referring to events in 1948, 60s, 70s, 90s. It's showing a pattern. This is part of the system that Palestinians have endured for 77 years, and not just since October 7th. So they actually contextualized October 7th for the court. And it quoted all the mainstream sources, the sources that Israel would call anti-Semitic, the World Health Organization, OCHA, Human Rights Council, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, UNICEF, Doctors Without Borders. I mean, on, international human rights agencies, and just put them all aside, and as though it made no sense whatsoever. So I would like the public to pay attention to the sources that South Africa used in its application. Mainstream sources. They're not going through internal sources. It's mainstream public sources to highlight what is actually taking place on the ground. And remember, this is just the first 2-3 months of the genocidal campaign. The ICJ can look at what has gone on since then, when they reach the merits phase of this. And with respect to Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, they were specifically charged with 7 crimes. The war crimes of, and this is a crucial one, especially today with what we're seeing in the news, starvation of civilians as a weapon of war. And this is where we have to ask our politicians. There has been a warrant out for his arrest since November. And now we're talking about starvation at its highest level in Gaza, and we're still doing nothing about it. And this is a war crime. Willfully causing great suffering and serious injury to body and health, willful killing or murder, and targeting a civilian population, and also the crimes against humanity of extermination, persecution, and other inhumane acts, which is a general provision that encompasses a lot of different other crimes. One last point on this. Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant are charged as a principal. They don't have to commit the crimes themselves, but they are officials with authority. So they don't have to personally kill or execute or persecute anyone. But if they are in charge of anybody that orders and solicits and induces those types of crimes, they can be charged as a principal, not as a secondary person, but as a principal offender. So that's how they're charged under the ICC for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And obviously, the crime of apartheid and the crime of genocide should be added on. That's something that we can use to further those prosecutions. We can influence the ICC prosecutor to add on those charges. Now that we have those charges in place, it would have been much harder for us to add on, to have a warrant out for apartheid and genocide. We'll take it step by step. Since he's already a potential defendant and he's on the website, okay, now we're calling for you to add on charges. And also look at, if you're a geek like me, look at Israel's responses to these. And watch the ICJ hearing. Most of the time was spent by the Israeli lawyers. And by the way, we're trained to do this. Lawyers know that if their client is obviously guilty and you're defending that client, your best defense is to change the topic, change the subject. And that's exactly what the Israeli lawyers did. They talked about Hamas this, Hamas that, Hamas this, Hamas that. Okay, even if Every word is true. The judges are not even they're not even putting that in their notes. They're not the one on trial. What are you talking about? This is not helping you. Genocide is not a defense to anything. Why are you even bringing that up? That's for Western consumption. The Israeli lawyers were just making a political statement so that those that are watching it from Fox News or whoever use those clips to continue the propaganda machine. So it had no relevance whatsoever.
I have a follow-up question to that. How do we encourage the ICC to add on charges?
Well, we can influence human rights organizations to put out reports. And look, the fact that the B'Tselem report just recently came out saying that what Israel is doing is genocide. I have colleagues of my own, that would say, why is it that when a Jewish human rights organization, Israeli human rights, comes out and says this, it somehow gains more attention? I can understand that point, but let's go ahead and use it politically. If now B'Tselem is saying it, an Israeli human rights organization is saying it, if they're the ones saying it, maybe that will resonate with more people here in the US and in the West. So that's something that we can also employ. And so long as we have more reports and more people talking about it, the more you make the statement and the more you emphasize it, Karim, trust me, ICC prosecutor Karim Khan would not have issued these warrants for war crimes and crimes against humanity, which have always existed under the Netanyahu regime, if there was no genocidal campaign. Even though genocide was not part of his warrants, the fact that that was happening, he had to do that.
Mm.
So, there's definitely politics involved. Look, I'm not trying to be hopeful. I mean, I'm trying to be realistic and hopeful as well. This is going to take a long time. Look, back to Bosnia, for example. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia opened in 1993, I believe, and it closed in 2007. Like, it took 14 years to get all the convictions that they can get. This is not a process that's going to take a year. This could take a decade. And we can't just sit back and wait a decade for international law to take its course. We can still use these victories, these opinions, as a way to move the needle forward.
Yeah, one of the questions in the chat actually by one of our viewers actually asks about that. Why does it take years for the ICC and the ICJ to issue these decisions and verdicts? The genocide is clearly ongoing for the world to watch on their phones, and perhaps this may not have been live streamed previously. And we're saying it's the first live streamed genocide, so it makes no sense that this would take years for these processes now.
That's a great question. I think that answers like, for the interest of justice and the gathering of as much evidence as possible, and all these cop-out answers, just like when our courts here say this question is non-justiciable, even though clearly is, as a cop-out to not have to make any decision on the matter. Same thing here. They'll find ways to get around it and say that we have to, or limited resources. There's a whole bunch of reasons that can be invoked, but yeah, it goes by. I can understand a couple of years, but 10 years just is absolutely ridiculous. But that's
Yeah,
I mean, the ICJ opinion for Bosnia was in 2015.
that's crazy.
Yeah, it was in 20. It just like, if we were in COVID, it would have just been 5 years prior. That's
Right, and that's 20 years after it happened. So
right.
that's 20 years, not even.
That's the ICJ, not the ICTY, the ad hoc tribunal that charged individuals. Remember, the ICJ never found or never did not say that Serbia is liable for the crime of genocide. It just said that it found genocide in one specific location, Srebrenica, this one specific location, found genocide, but Serbia, as this new state, should not be held liable for those crimes. So it fleshed out a legal standard that we can use to further the idea of genocide. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that because it brought up a point that I forgot to mention. There are two cases pending before the ICJ that are crucial to take note of. This one, South Africa versus Israel, and also the Gambia versus Myanmar.
Oh,
Why is that? Why is that? Why is that crucial? Because these are two instances where a non-contiguous, non-interested, non-warring party is bringing a case before the ICJ. South Africa is not the target of Israel's genocidal campaign. Gaza is. But because under the Genocide Convention, third states, those that are not involved in the warring aspect of it, have an obligation to prevent genocide. They have an obligation to make sure that they don't further the crime of genocide. So South Africa felt obligated under the Genocide Convention to bring forth this case on behalf of the people of Gaza. So, and the Gambia, same thing. The mass slaughter of the Rohingya has nothing to do with the Gambia, but Gambia brought the case as an interested party under the Genocide Convention, even though it's a non-contiguous state. They're not nowhere near Myanmar, Burma, but they are signatory to the Genocide Convention. So that's very crucial. Unlike Serbia versus Croatia, contiguous warring parties, Bosnia, the Bosnian genocide, same thing. So that's a new phenomena that we're seeing. And the Gambia Myanmar case was in 2019, and that's still ongoing. So that actually set the precedent. And uh, I know we're getting. I don't think this is related to the same question. Could have been for an earlier question. When I was talking about the dolus specialis, the special intent that's required under the Genocide Convention, the court takes a very narrow view of that. It's not looking at it from there's two different approaches. The knowledge-based approach for intent, by committing acts A, B, and C, this will probably result in the destruction of this group as such. That's one way. The other way is I'm consciously committing these acts to cause the destruction of that group as such. So it's a different analysis. That's a little more narrow interpretation, and that's the interpretation that the ICJ is using. So, I mean, it's an uphill battle. Don't be surprised if this takes 10, 20 years as well. Hopefully, I want to be wrong on this. I really would like to come back in about a year or two and, see a decision rendered on the merits, but,
okay. So let's talk a little bit about accountability. So someone's asking in the chat, what can you tell us about Sudan taking the UAE to the ICJ, and why did the ICJ dismiss this case? But thinking about these other cases, I also wanted to ask you, how effective are these courts historically in holding powerful states accountable for human rights violations or crimes against humanity?
yeah. So look, the United States, and we got to talk about our government, shamefully protects Israel from accountability and objects to holding itself accountable as well. So the U.S. State Department made clear its position that the U.S. and Israel should not be subject to the court's jurisdiction, as they are not state parties, and that Palestine is not a sovereign state. But these positions have already been debunked by the court. That's not necessary. Palestine did not have to be a sovereign state in the sovereign sense, only a state for jurisdictional purposes. I think that statement that I just made will go over Trump's head. I don't think he would know what the heck I just said. But that's a very crucial distinction between the two. They're not saying that Palestine is a state under general public international law. They're saying that Palestine is a state from the standpoint of the jurisdictional process that the court allows for entities to bring their cases to the court, and as such, it is a state. So, and I think that explanation will still go over his head, but that's basically the rebuttal to that. I actually want to mention now that you brought this up, the hypocrisy of our position, not me, us, the U.S. So when the ICC opened in 2002, Congress actually passed a bipartisan bill. Of course, on Israel, it's almost always bipartisan, and they called it the American Service Members Protection Act, I believe, and that limits the U.S.'s ability to cooperate with the court. So the main reason for this bill was to make sure that American citizens are liberated that are held by the court and its allies, i.e. Israel. So if there's a war criminal that belongs to the state of Israel and he got arrested, this obligates the U.S. to actually go in and try to rescue that individual. And that was actually dubbed the Hague Invasion Clause. You know, the court is in The Hague. You're basically invading the Hague's authority, and you're trying to play military ruler to try to take out somebody who's been rightly arrested. But the hypocrisy of this, we all know what's been happening in Ukraine. When President, when Trump became president in his first term, he actually revoked the visa of the ICC prosecutor and other staff members, and under the pretext of a national emergency. Remember that? Remember when he called for a national emergency? He issued an executive order that froze all the assets of ICC employees, agents, and even their immediate family members. Now, President Biden comes in, the liberal, and he revoked Trump's executive order, said, no, we're not going to freeze assets and arrest people that work for the ICC. But we are going to go back to the status quo ante, which pretty much says that we object to the International Criminal Court's assertions of jurisdiction over us and over our allies, which includes who? Israel. So let's take a look at how this ended up playing out with respect to Ukraine. So from April of 2022, 43 states, including EU member states, requested that the ICC investigate war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Ukraine. I'm not saying that was the wrong decision. That was the right decision. But notice the selective outrage. So all of you Western states come together to hold Putin accountable, but none of you are coming together to hold Netanyahu accountable. And we're talking about the same court. So in one instance, you're for the court and you accept it as it relates to these other criminals, but when it relates to you and what you did in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places, and what Israel is doing in Gaza, we're leaving that alone. That's the utter hypocrisy that we cannot accept. That's another thing that we can actually use to further this, to say you can't have your cake and eat it too. Either you're going to be supporting the ICC in its efforts, full stop, or you're rejecting it, full stop, and you'll say, and you have to come out and say, I don't believe Putin should be tried for war crimes. You have to fully make that statement in order for you to be taken seriously. But politicians won't make that statement. They want to be hypocritical. So call them out on their hypocrisy. That's exactly
the double standard, the very clear, obvious double standard. So you're talking about like hold them accountable and call them out and things like that. So that leads me to my next question, which we have about 10 minutes left. So I'm gonna kind of combine a few questions into like a 2-3 part question, but you answer what makes sense. So in your view, how can civil society organizations like American Muslims for Palestine or Muslim Civic Coalition or all of us who are attending here help ensure that international court decisions don't stay symbolic, but they translate into real world consequences? What role do US-based organizations like ours, but also others, play in translating international legal decisions into domestic advocacy and into this public awareness that we're trying to create? And how can community members and students stay involved or informed in ways that meaningfully support these legal efforts?
Yeah, I think the language of international law, while not complete and does not offer full justice, it gives us a good basis from which to have a discussion with elected leaders and those that are in positions of power. So when I meet, and I've met a lot of members of Congress and their staffers or who else that works for them, and even local officials. I make sure that I use the language of international law because there's no way that they can reject that. So, for example, when I was with Senator Durbin, and we were talking about boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS, I asked him the following question. I said, Senator, do you support full equality for everyone that lives between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, regardless of who they are? Do you believe that there should be an end to the military occupation? Do you believe that international law should be implemented to its fullest extent for all human beings, regardless of race, ethnicity, nationality, or religion? He said, yeah, I would support that. And I said, Senator, you just supported BDS. The thing that you don't want to support. That's exactly what BDS is. Is that
showing them their own
anti-Semitic? And he started laughing a little bit because it was a private discussion. But I'm like, this is silly that when we look at the buzzwords, when we hear BDS, remember during Obamacare, if you say Obamacare, do you support Obamacare? Many people that don't like Obama will just say no. But when you break it down, when you piecemeal it, do you support insurance companies denying you due to pre-existing conditions? Of course not, but that's a central tenet of Obamacare. And you can 100% support that. So because you took the label out, now you're starting to think clearly about the question. So that's exactly what the senator was doing. He was thinking clearly about the question, because now I took out the boogeyman word, BDS. Ooh, that's exactly what we need to do. We need to not just focus on the labels that we want our elected officials to hear, but actually assess their content and present it to them with that substance in mind. So now they can rethink it. And I believe Senator Durbin did think it over and realized how silly and stupid that position really is. So, these are steps that you can take, and organizations like AMP, for example, our pillars are education and advocacy. So we have to educate the American public, but also educate our elected officials. I have people come to me that are running for office. How should I frame my Palestine platform? Because they realize that the young vote is actually becoming prominent. And that's something that Andrew Cuomo, for example, underestimated in his primary run against Zohran Mamdani. He said he did not think the young people would come out in those numbers to vote for Mamdani. So he underestimated the young person's vote. And that's exactly why Benjamin Netanyahu, when he came here, he went on a podcast. He's going on podcast talking to young people because they're losing the TikTok war. They're losing the social media war. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I believe, many members of Congress that were behind the banning of TikTok, I think that was related somewhat, partially, maybe totally, with respect to Israel. And because Israel is losing that TikTok battle. So I think we need to utilize social media as organizations, because that's how we get platformed, and that's how we can actually spread our message. We just, we can't just rely on mainstream press to get that message across. And look, there is a sea change that we are witnessing on the ground, thanks to organizations like Muslim Civic Coalition and AMP and others, because now the narrative has shifted, and young people are seeing things for what they are and not for how it's presented in our mainstream press. And because of that, if you study the polling data from Gallup poll to Quinnipiac to Pew Research and other polling data, you will see that the younger generation has shifted away and have crossed the threshold into sympathizing more with Palestinians. And I mean across the political spectrum. That young demographic is absolutely key. It's absolutely crucial. So even evangelical Christians, the most right wing, the younger crowd within that group are not buying into this premillennial eschatology of Jesus returning and converting everybody or sending them all to hell and the rapture. They're not buying into all that stuff. They're saying, No, I don't think it's right to be doing all this stuff. I want to be a Christian and be wholesome and all of that, but no, we shouldn't be kicking people out of their homes and doing these things just because we believe it's the right thing to do. It doesn't make sense to me. It does not resonate with me as a young person today in the modern era. And I'm talking about evangelical Christians. So we're seeing that shift along the political spectrum, and that's what they fear the most. So
Yeah.
utilize those voices and make sure that we inculcate them with the right information and guidance and have them work with us. I'm sure Muslim Civic Coalition have a lot of young folks in there, and that's what we need. We need to rely on them because that's where they are the ones that are shifting the narrative. And
Yeah.
that's the main target, and they're going to be our future leaders.
So just to close off, I just wanted to know, do you have any closing remarks? One question in the chat was the UK and France are saying that they're going to recognize Palestine in September. What legal standard is this for an existing state? I wanted to end with that because it's a little bit more of a hopeful note. And also just generally, if you have any closing words, we know that the limitations of international legal mechanisms is, sometimes the enforcement power is weak and that it's a little bit politically compromised, like we're talking about. So with that in mind, with what's going on with the UK and France, recognizing Palestine, with that in mind, feel free to give any.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I may disappoint you here. I think this is just a cop out for them as states. You're not calling for the ICC to investigate the crime of genocide. You're not saying that what Israel is doing amounts to genocide. So this is kind of like okay, I'll give you a bone. All right, fine. I'll recognize a state for you. Now, I'm here to say right now, there are some colleagues of mine that will take this as a huge step in the right direction. And I'm not saying it's not a good step. I'm just saying I'm not going to give it that kind of regard or praise. Like I would not say thank you, France. I will not
You're
make
not off the hook kind of thing.
Yeah, I will not. I mean, you were talking about a genocide in the midst of a genocidal campaign. Okay, I recognize that you exist.
Right.
What? Okay, thank you. What do you can you stop the genocide? Can you say that it's a genocide? Something. No, you're not even no. So I mean, I'm not giving it that kind of credence, but I did see a question here on Francesca Albanese.
Yeah.
Can I tackle that?
Yeah. We
Okay.
have minutes.
Okay. So I love Francesca Albanese. I talk to her a lot. So I read all of her reports, and yeah, she's absolutely targeted because she's actually reporting. She has detailed reports about what has taken place over the last 22 months, and those that are profiteering from it. That's the main impetus behind these sanctions. And this actually means that what she's doing is effective. So go read her reports. She's sanctioned because she's exposing corporations that are benefiting from the onslaught and the genocidal campaign in Gaza, but also what Israel is doing, and also the framing of her reports is within a settler colonial context. This is a context that is not talked about in mainstream in mainstream press. So she's putting the narrative on a course where it's not what Israel has become that's the problem. It's its foundation that's the problem. How it was founded is the problem. So she's planting the seed for that rethinking, and I think that's absolutely essential. What
I
is that?
linked the report in the chat, and there's also a YouTube video for those who are not able to read at 7 p.m. Central Time. Right now, you can watch the YouTube video as well.
Yeah, she loves to invoke the word colonial. That's absolutely crucial.
It's
a colonial enterprise. It's not just, and this is where, so for example, there's the Human Rights Watch report on apartheid, for example. If you read the title of that report, this was years ago, like 5 years ago, they issued this report. The title of it is A Threshold Crossed. And the implication of that is over time, Israel became an apartheid regime. That's 100% incorrect. Now, I read the report. I believe everybody should read the report. It's essential reading, but don't use their framing. Just use it for data. but don't use it for the framing of the discussion. Israel did not become an apartheid regime. It was founded as an apartheid regime. And that's a crucial difference in how you conceptualize it. But I think in line with the Palestinian intellectual tradition, and that's not how human rights reports are. So when you read human rights reports, don't use their framing as your departure point of analysis. Use the data for knowledge, for history, for to better understand what is actually taking place and what has transpired. But use the Palestinian historians and the Palestinian intellectuals framing of Zionism and the Palestinian relationship with it. So that's not related to this, but I just wanted to.
No, it's definitely related. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you. We could go on about this for so long. I did link the report in the chat, and I also linked American Muslims for Palestine's action alerts. There's a page online that you all can get involved with. The chapter, the Chicago chapter, is very active. Tarek, I've seen you at so many protests and so many events where I haven't even like there were too many people around you, so you didn't even know I was there, so I just saw you. So the chapter is really active. Appreciate all that you're doing in the city. Appreciate this partnership as well. Lena also put some information in the chat, some volunteer opportunity, and just being connected with Muslim Civic Coalition. We do put on know your rights type thing once a month, and this time we shifted a little bit to know your laws, know your international law. And so thank you so much, Tarek. Anything else you want to say?
Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate
And
it very
so we'll
much.
continue to do some really cool collaborative work just so that we educate
Absolutely.
more of us so that we can educate others.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for
Appreciate
attending.
you guys.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.